very delighted to call, following the panel speakers joining us today, Dr. Renato Reside Jr., Undersecretary for Tax Research and Expenditure Monitoring, Department of Finance. Assistant Governor Lyn Javier, Policy and Specialized Supervision Subsector, Financial Supervision Sector, Bangko, Sentral ng Pilipinas. Is there a team? Alright. Bonner Lorecto, SGB Principal. And last but not least, Mr. Heng Dean Law, Managing Director, Pollination. Thank you once again. So for all of us in the room and especially at the back, please feel free to engage with us. There will be an opportunity for the audience to interact with our esteemed panel speakers towards the end of the panel discussion. But just to set the context and as well, for my colleagues, please warn us of the time because as moderator, my job is to keep the time as well. Dr. Renato Reside Jr., as I mentioned, is the Undersecretary at the Department of Finance. He oversees the National Tax Research Center, which is mandated to conduct continuing research in taxation to restructure the tax system and raise the level of consciousness among our people to achieve a faster rate of economic growth and to bring about a more equitable distribution of wealth and income. If you say it that way, Dr. Reside, there might not be opposition to taxes in this room as much, right? Prior to becoming the Undersecretary of TRIM, Professor Reside was teaching economics at the University of the Philippines. As an academician, he was frequently involved as consultant and writer-researcher in many matters related to TOF, legislative concerns like the Train Law, Create Law, TIMTA, and other acts giving rise to tax expenditures. He has been commissioned extensively by government and multilateral and bilateral agencies, including the World Bank, ADB, JICA, to work and write papers on taxes, pensions, and other public finance and economics issues. Undersecretary Reside obtained his PhD in economics in 1996 from Fordham University and his AB in management economics in 1988 from the Ateneo de Manila University. He is happily married and is a father to one son. Maybe a round of applause. We also are joined by Ms. Lyn Javier, who is the Assistant Governor of the Policy and Specialized Supervision Subsector under the Financial Supervision Sector of the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas. She oversees the supervisory policy and data departments of the BSP as well as the supervision of specialized areas, specifically money laundering, information technology, treasury, and trust operations. Ms. Javier is a designated BSP representative to the Basel Consultative Group, the Executives Meeting of East Asia Pacific Central Banks, Working Group on Banking Supervision, and the Network for Greening and the Financial System Workstream on Scaling Up Green Finance. At the domestic level, Ms. Javier is involved in interagency committees and working groups related to the supervision of financial institutions and the promotion of the sustainability agenda. She also represents BSP in accounting and auditing standard setting bodies in the Philippines. Ms. Lyn Javier. We also have with us Mr. Heng Dean Law, who started his career with the Singapore Ministry of Foreign Affairs. He spent 9 years with MFA and was a first secretary at the Singapore Embassy in Jakarta from 2005 to 2009. Heng Dean was with investment firm Temasek from 2011 till 2022, where he managed strategic relationships in Southeast Asia and supported Temasek's investment in the region. Heng Dean also worked on sustainability and climate issues, including the setting up of Gen Zero, a $5 billion Singapore dollar investment platform wholly owned by Temasek that focuses on carbon markets and decarbonization, where Heng Dean worked on strategy and organizational matters. From 2022 to 2023, Heng Dean was a senior advisor on carbon markets and sustainability with an Indonesian-listed palm oil company, PT Triputra Agro Persada. Heng Dean has a BSc in Accounting and Finance from the London School of Economics and an MBA from INSEAD. Heng Dean Law. Last but not least, certainly, is a good friend of ours and also a climate and decarbonization champion. Juana Loreto is principal of SGD Climate Change and Sustainability Services with over 18 years of experience in sustainable development and climate change advisory. Has guided more than 90 companies across 20 over sectors, including leading financial institutions and integrating sustainability into their operations. Bonner is known for his ability to cut through the hype surrounding sustainability to reveal its true value. He assists public and business sectors in addressing the complexities of climate risks and the transition to a low-carbon economy by developing systemic solutions to unlock capital flows into sustainable investments. Ladies and gentlemen, a good friend of mine, Mr. Juana Loreto. All right, let's dive into the discussion. I'll kick off with Dr. Reside. So, we're talking about the low carbon economy bill, sir, and your expertise as the tax expert of the country. Are we taking the policy direction toward imposing a carbon tax?
Okay. Wait.
All right.
We don't have audio again. Can I call on our technical team, please?
All right, thank you very much. First of all, I'd like to thank the organizers for the invite. Let me just say that I'm a relative newbie when it comes to studying climate because I'm more into tax studies. So I was thrust into this relatively recently. But fortunately, many of the tools in economics are kind of portable. They can be used across disciplines like subject matters. The Philippine government, the Department of Finance anyway, is looking into, so as Congresswoman Veloz said a while ago, the Philippine government is in fact, and the DOF is in fact looking, studying the possibility of setting up division trading system. And these are, of course, part of our due diligence, partly because we share everybody's commitment to wanting to alleviate the environmental concerns. And also, we also have revenue interests in potential revenue interests in mind. So these are among the drivers anyway of the DOF. So as I mentioned earlier, we do have, we did engage the World Bank and ADB and other institutions to conduct a study. So that we're still waiting for that. I'm honest. And so we certainly hope that the results of the study will help us propel towards it. At the same time, when you look at our environment in terms of instruments that can help abate carbonization at the moment, we do have the motor vehicle user charge. We also have excise taxes at the moment. So the DOF wants to take a holistic view towards the abatement of carbonization in our environment right now, and it certainly is also taking a serious look at looking at other instruments, as I said just a while ago. So we're waiting for the result of the studies, and when they come out, we'll look at our instruments in totality. But we do have instruments already. The motor vehicle user charge is one of the bills that the DOF will push for in the coming months, and we hope that that bill will also help the carbonization.
Thank you so much, Dr. Reside. And I turn to AG Lyn. First of all, congratulations for PSP publishing its first annual report. It's amazing when the Central Bank itself is leading the charge in creating sustainable finance opportunities in the country. But Angeline, your quick reaction to what Congresswoman Tuazon mentioned on the possible inflationary impacts as well of carbon taxes. How do you weigh in?
Thank you, Ping, and thank you for inviting the Bangko Sentral in this event. Well, Again, the BSP supports initiatives towards achieving our climate ambitions. Again, for promoting a low carbon economy, there are three overarching things I think, on my personal view, that we should consider. First, the robustness of this mechanism would actually dictate the extent of its impact to our economy. We have to adhere to widely accepted principles on this one, promote transparency, and ensure that there wouldn't be any unintended consequences to the vulnerable sectors, the households and MSMEs. And this was highlighted as well by Congressman Ana earlier, that this should not be at the expense of the vulnerable sector, meaning we have to make it still affordable for all of them. That's a key consideration if we wanted to ensure that no one will be left behind in all our initiatives.
Thank you so much, TG Lyn, which prompts me to ask you, Bonner, this question. So, a quick, I was made privy to the latest copy of the draft of the bill, and a quick control F to it mentions carbon taxes only once. The concentration and the focus is really on the internal carbon pricing mechanism, carbon offsets, cap and trade, and then purchasing of allowances. If, for example, your business is already given a certain allowance for you to pollute, and then you have surplus or used up that allowance that you can purchase from other businesses that are less polluting. That is actually the main essence of an ETS or carbon trading system. But Bonar, is that, do you suppose that that is a weakness in the current draft of the bill? That the emphasis is not really on carbon tax, but on carbon pricing mechanisms?
Good.
Thank you, Ping. I've followed through the different iterations of the many versions of the bill. Ultimately, we build the version that's suitable to climate change really, and how that bill evolved has actually sort of be adapted in accordance to all the comments that were drawn from the audience, coming from the concerns of the private sector around potential pass-on costs to consumers, but also the intent of generating revenue for investing in carbon emissions, low carbon compensation. The way I see the bill now, how it's framed, first of all, from the low carbon economy bill, we have made it into a low carbon investment act. So the emphasis is now not so much on the punitive aspect of trying to tax a private sector who is taking a lot of emissions, but an enabling mechanism to drive decarbonization in a way that also takes advantage of the many economic benefits that low carbon investment presents. For example, the transition to low carbon economy, particularly in energy sector, could create so many more jobs. It could create a lot of economic value than if we take the business as usual. That's from population, the population by livings. They have all the numbers that supports the that. And so what the bill actually provides now, first, to me, effectiveness of any mechanism is around the design, the architecture of the bill itself. And that architecture determines whether there will be an unintended consequence or not. And the way it is structured now is, instead of immediately taxing every amount of emission that the company emits, they are actually allowing the company to set a roadmap in 2030, 2050, through which they can slowly transition themselves, but in accordance with below the pathway, but also giving them the opportunity to look at how they can make their operations more efficient. Invest or invest not. Making their operation more efficient is always good because it lowers cost. That's a low-hanging fruit. But to a certain extent that you cannot do that internally, there are options that you can put that money into already profitable businesses that are low carbon. Because you have a lot of low carbon, like renewable energy investments that are already performing well in the economy. You can just actually put your investments there in terms of purchase of equity. So these mechanisms that allows private sector to put that decarbonization fund into a place where it can also generate profitability is the exact mechanism that prevents them to have to increase the cost of their products and therefore potentially impact the economy in terms of inflationary impact.
All right.
So that's how the bill is now designed in a way that it will not cost the business additional cost that potentially can be. So in other words, it's not on the red side of your balance sheet, but it goes into the positive side of your balance sheet.
Thank you so much.
It's there.
Thank you so much. Because earlier, when the bill was just being introduced or has had several iterations, we already had an initial pushback from, for example, the Philippine Chamber of Commerce and Industry saying that this could impact the economy. This will impact several sectors, particularly agriculture and energy. So we'll discuss more on how we could potentially allay that fear by turning to Heng Dean over here. Heng Dean, we are so blessed and privileged to have you here. We are so happy that you could share with us the regional perspective of decarbonization, especially as it seems that Singapore can't wait to decarbonize and introduce carbon markets. It's like they just last week inaugurated the Carbon Market Alliance, and very recently as well, in the same platform, Unlocking Capital for Sustainability in Malaysia, Bursa Malaysia offered their nature-based carbon credits initial IPO in this same Unlocking Capital for Sustainability Malaysia event. So is it that we are going to come from carrot, or is it that we're going to appreciate the sticks in this decarbonization journey that the Philippines is going into?
Thanks, Bing. So maybe before I give my answer, maybe a bit of introduction about Pollination, because we're relatively new in this country. So Pollination is a climate-focused company. So we do two things. We are a consultant, but we also undertake project development and investment. Carbon markets is actually one of the key things we do, but not the only thing we do. We also advise companies on decarbonization, nature, blended finance. On the investment project development side, we have undertaken nature-based carbon projects, the world's largest mangrove carbon project in Pakistan. We are partner in that. We're also undertaking or developing large energy transition projects in Australia as well as the US. So we wear both hats in terms of being a consultant as well as an investor/developer. Now, the question on carrot versus stick, I think obviously every country has to decide, according to the circumstances. I think it has to be just, because the impact will trickle down throughout the economy. But the other flip side of it is, I think all governments have to consider the ease of implementation as well. In the case of Singapore, the fact of the matter is that we have limited options to decarbonize. About 40% of the emissions come from power, 44% come from industry. A lot of it is from petrochemicals. And about 95% or more is actually fueled by natural gas. Mostly pipe natural gas as well as liquefied natural gas. Singapore doesn't have land for wind, solar, geothermal. We are thinking about nuclear. We're thinking about green hydrogen. This is probably 10, 15, 20 years away from us. But we have set targets. We have to meet our NDC commitments in 2030. We have a net zero commitment in 2050. But the reason why, I can't speak on behalf of government, but one of the reasons why the government introduced a carbon tax is because it's easy to implement. But what the Singapore government did in this case is it gave a projection. So it wasn't from zero to hero overnight. So it was, I think, started at $5. And it only applied to the largest emitters. It didn't apply to everyone. And then, but it gave a projection. We are going to increase it, actually starting this year, from 5 to 25 Sing. In another 2 years' time, it's going to be 45. By 2030, it's a projection of 50 to 80. The idea is to basically tell companies, this is coming, you need to do something about it. Now, that versus allowances. The allowances, I think, it does probably makes the impact a bit less in terms of inflation, in terms of impact on low-income communities. The tricky thing for allowances is at what level do you decide? Yeah, as we see from the European example, the Europeans are the most advanced in this. And in order not to affect the competitiveness of their high-emitting sectors, they give them some of these industries free allowances and then reduce them over time. So it is effectively the same as us increasing our tax over time. But in terms of execution, both have its pros and cons. So each country has to decide at what to do. But I think the fundamental of point is that companies have to realize this is coming. Because if not the Philippine government, if you are exporting to Europe, you have to worry about this thing called a carbon border adjustment mechanism, where you get taxed anyway. And it's actually spreading from Europe to other countries. I think UK, US, Australia, they're all thinking about similar schemes. So this thing is coming one way or the other. And as what Bruno has pointed out, it actually makes good business if you can figure out a cost-effective way of bringing down emissions.
Thank you so much, Heng Dean. You've actually touched on a point that I will ask Dr. Reseda to expand a little bit more on the CBAM, or the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. Will it impact the Philippines, sir?
I think there's an existing study, or I think a study will come out soon, but some of the studies that I've seen suggest that the impact of CBAM on this country is not that large. We nonetheless, it doesn't preclude us from preparing, because there may be, although the overall impact on the country might not be that large, there may be certain industries that might be affected. So certainly we look forward to assisting potentially affected industries with respect to the CBAM.
Thank you so much, Dr. Reseda. Agent Lyn, ahead of the Low Carbon Economy Investment Act becoming into law, the BSP has already been engaging with the banks towards sustainable finance. And obviously, as the intermediary and the supervisor of the banks as financial intermediaries, you are trying to lower transitional risk, physical risk of climate change on investments. How have you seen the impact has grown over the years since you launched the Sustainable Finance Framework of Bangko Sentral?
Yeah, thank you, Ping. I think just to also communicate what's the role of the BSP in this space. We're all in the management of risk. So I think a big win for the BSP is for our supervised financial institutions building their capacity and awareness on these types of risks. Because climate change related risks are transmitted through the same risk channels that we're looking at in the banking industry. And because risk management principles are universal, we already have set out the foundation framework in terms of managing this risk. Governance, identifying, managing, and controlling this risk exposures. Now, properly managing risk, you should also be able to see the opportunities. That's why recently we also issued some incentives in terms of financing sustainable investments and projects. So alongside implementing rules and regulations on compliance with the Agricultural, Fisheries and Rural Development Act, or the Agri-AGRA, wherein we recognize as eligible alternative compliance investments in sustainable projects. We also granted additional capacity to lend to sustainable and transition projects. So it's additional 15% from the 25% single borrowers limit. And for banks issuing bonds, we also reduce the reserve requirement. So these are all time-bound incentives, and for the bond reserve requirements, we're reducing it to zero by next year. So that's a big help already.
That's really amazing. So I'm sure that our banking and FI players here represented by BDO Unibank, we have a representative from Metro Bank as well, are excited to hear of these developments. I come to you, Monar. So the current LCE highlights, as I mentioned, the internal carbon pricing mechanism. Explain that to us, and why some, as early as now, especially from the civic society organizations, are worried that this has no teeth.
Well, first of all, if there's a law that mandates corporations to decarbonize along 1.5 pathway, that is as good as a teeth that we can get, right? Because there is a compliance mechanism, there's a third-party audit that ensures that they do it, they meet the decarbonization. The concern of some of the civil society representatives, especially the UAs, Nintendo series, is sort of it gives the business all the sort of decision making in terms of allocation of that decarbonization fund, where it should go, right? So it presents as a concern coming from civil society. But if you look at our own Philippine setup, where government and its institutions have done so well, right? But in terms of how to put this money to work, I believe that is competency of the private sector. And because the low carbon economy bill sort of incentivizes more and more businesses to invest, we would like to have a policy that really sort of gives the flexibility to the business to determine where they want to invest, as long as you have clear guidelines on what are these decarbonization investments. And the law also provides something called decarbonization taxonomy, which ESB already has, right? So if you are clear where to put this money, that can make money for us, and also achieves decarbonization, and allow the business to choose where to put this money, because they have their own independent, own risk appetites, right? And so you're fostering that investment. And so to me, tax is good because it scares companies to reduce their emission. And it's a very straightforward mechanism. But there is also a tendency where if you hand over the money to government, we are not sure, to respect government, that this
Careful,
money
Dr. Iside is there.
will really have a decarbonization outcome. Again, this is a personal opinion, and whether this is going to be profitable as a business, right? So those are the thinking that has emerged, not necessarily my own, has emerged in the conversations in the committee. But of course, if the business chooses to hand over this money to government and let government implement the decarbonization, the bill also provides for that. So I think having a more liberal, flexible framework so that we can push a policy agenda that achieves and has a sort of a private sector role and also government sector role, then I think it's a very good, more democratic way of moving forward in terms of radicalization.
Thank you so much, Bonar. Heng Dean, I'd like to ask if you think that the LCU bill in the Philippines could help us tap international compliance carbon markets, such as that is enshrined within Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. And what do you, based on your work at Pollination, perceive to be the Philippines' economic opportunity in participating in the international compliance carbon markets?
So based on what the Congresswoman had mentioned earlier, it appears that the bill has some of the basic building blocks. Then she mentioned MRV, voluntary reporting and verification, to build towards ITMOs, which is internationally transferred mitigation outcomes. Problem with sustainability is an alphabet soup, and some of these terms can be quite technical. But and I think the other thing that she mentioned is basically a carbon registry. So these are some of the basic building blocks. So ITMOs, if you want to tap into international markets as per Article 600 Paris Agreement, you need to be able to transfer the credits. So in accounting terms, it's basically a debit credit between the respective registries. You want to transfer a credit from Philippines to say Singapore, the adjustments is to be made on the respective carbon books, if I could put it that way. That means Philippines cannot claim that credit towards its own NDC. Now then the reason is why would the Philippines want to do that? Now, if you look at Philippines NDCs, a lot of it is what we call conditional. That means it's conditional on external finance. So that could help Philippines meet some of its NDC commitments. The other way to think about it, simplistically put, is that for some of the mitigation activities that require more capex, for instance, that could actually be funded through ITMOs. Because if you export to Singapore, as I mentioned, this is kind of like pegged, not exactly the same, but pegged against Singapore's carbon tax, you get a premium. So there are buyers, could be countries, could be companies that are willing to pay a premium for two things. One is high integrity, high quality credits. Second thing is that it has to be adjusted to address this issue of double claiming. So what the Congresswoman has outlined in the bill, I think there are some of these basic building blocks. And this could apply to nature. You know, Philippines has a lot of mangroves. Actually, the other thing that the Congresswoman mentioned is adaptation, which I think is a bit of ignored part of this whole conversation, especially in the case of Philippines, because obviously you're at the forefront of the typhoons every year, a couple of weeks ago. And some of these natural ecosystems, mangroves in particular, could help form the adaptation aspect of it, and also generate high quality credits. Now, the point of government versus private sector, from our experience in Pakistan, it was PPP. So we basically partnered with the local government, in this case from same province. And I think that model can be replicated elsewhere around the world. And in the case of Philippines, just one last point. Apart from nature base is actually energy transition. So ILR Corp, with regards to the South Luzon Thermal Energy Corporation, is basically trying to bring forward the retirement, and they're trying to use what we call transition credits to make it more economically feasible, supported by the Singapore Monetary Authority of Singapore, which is the equivalent of PSP here. So there are opportunities, and hopefully the bill would help support some of these activities to help the Philippines achieve its potential.
Thank you so much, Heng Dean. With my eye on the time, I'll call 1 to 2 questions from the audience. Please state your organization's name and your question very briefly, straight to the point. Thank you. Jed. Yes, please go.
Jen.
Hi, good morning to the panelists. I am Jaden Flores. I come from Reference Philippines. My question is, what role does robust ESG information play in enhancing investor confidence and driving sustainable growth within corporations in the context of galvanizing Philippines carbon markets? Thank you.
Sure. Sorry, the question is, what role does information? Right. So I was trained as an accountant. So basically, the usual saying, if you cannot measure, you cannot manage. Yeah. So and I think over the past few years, there's been a bit more robustness injected into ESG reporting. There are frameworks, GRI, so GHG protocol. Again, it's an alphabet soup of sorts. But the long and short of it, I think there's been much progress. With regards to climate, it is relatively straightforward in a sense that you try to boil everything down into one metric, which is ton CO2 equivalent. And the tricky part is how do you determine in value chain, outside value chain, so on and so forth. But things are, there's technologies being developed, there are startups that's trying to improve on this as well. So you look at sustainability reports by different companies, the level of detail has also increased. But that's just the first step, obviously, because then what do you do with the information? And I think people like TCFD, the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, they put together a broad framework. It's not just reporting, you have to basically go beyond that. You have to be accountable to your board. You have to start taking action with a view towards all the information that's generated. So it's still work in progress, especially with regards to Scope 3, value chain emissions. It is quite tricky. How do you, someone's Scope 1 is another person's Scope 3. So how do you entangle the two? And it is still not yet fully resolved. The thing about the two other aspects, the social and the governance one, I think there are also metrics, but it's a bit more qualitative.
Thank you so much. And Dr. Racida would like to weigh in.
Yeah. Yes, thank you for that question. Because I'm a new guy to talk about ESG.
Okay.
But I see that it's about metrics, and I was about to react a while ago also on to complement the things that are going on that is outside of the bill that was being discussed right now. And I wanted to talk about the potential impact of the PENCAS. According to what I have here, the PENCAS Act mandates the compilation of officially designated statistics of depletion, degradation, restoration, as capital, environmental protection, expenditures, and I think when you look at this is a start. This is a start of getting information, more information about the damage to the environment that harmful activities, the harmful activities did. So, and in connection to what we were talking about a while ago, tax policy, this is a very important information for tax because ideally, one should set, when one thinks about setting a tax, one should think about quantifying the damage to the environment. So there now being the start of compilation of statistics of the damage being what we did, that now paves the way for taxation. We pay that damage because I could be studying not just taxation, also the opposite. So you want to give incentives. You want to calibrate the incentives so they are commensurate with the activity with going to favor the environment.
Thank you so much, Dr. CD. Can I just have a feel for the room? Because I understand we're eating into the morning health break. But I also seem to see that everybody is really peeled into the discussion here. Am I right in that impression? Are you willing to sacrifice your morning health break to tune in to the conversations? All right, I have your authorization. So thank you for authorizing us to keep on. I'll entertain another question from the group. Yes, please, the lady in red. Kindly state your name, your organization, and briefly your question.
Yes,
I am Mirna Velasco from Manila Bulletin. So I am an energy reporter. So my question is, carbon credit trading and clean energy financing are magnet for terrorist financing. And a lot of scams are happening in other parts of the world. And I know that one of the companies investing here in the Philippines, one of the shareholders had been, its company in Singapore had been rated by LAS. But they're trying to come to other markets that have very loose policies when it comes to emissions of unknown terrorist financing and RE and carbon credits on the target. What are the policies of BOF and BSG when it comes to that?
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Very happy I chose Mirna to give that question. Now, let's all tune in. I'll start with the lady first, Angeline.
I was supposed to say copy paste on what Dr. Sida will say, but again, as I mentioned earlier, risk management principles are universal. So we look at the governance and whether banks actually understand before they engage into these exposures. Second, we look at adherence to globally recognized standards and practices. That includes accounting and transparency practices. At the end of the day, we look at the accountability of banks in terms of ensuring the integrity of the transaction, promoting the integrity of the financial system.
Thank you so much, Angeline. Dr. Raside?
I agree. So obviously, first the BOF has this joint act responsibility where they have to make sure and enter financing schemes that you get into the place. We will make sure that they are prudent and they follow the financial standards. We also get the help from beyond, which is based in BSK. So rest assured that we will be in charge.
Thank you so much. That's very reassuring. from the Department of Finance under Secretary Resilien, rest assured that they're doing their best. Bonner, short and sweet.
Yeah. From the private sector lens, there's always a process when you do transactions, whether it's a huge buyout, investment. There's always something called due diligence. And it's a very good practice for private sector to do what is called ESG due diligence. And what that entails is people like us go to the two parties, whether sell side or buy side, look at their ESG performance, and that's where you see their financial, their ownership structure, and all of those things. That could potentially become a red flag if there is an intent towards terrorism. So to me, in terms of mechanism, making ESG due diligence whenever there is a transaction with foreign entity coming to the Philippines, I think is a very effective approach that needs to be mainstream. Hopefully it can be made more mainstream through policy.
Thank you very much. And with that, we wrap up our first panel discussion. Please join me in saying thank you to our panel speakers. Ms. Lyn Javier of the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas, Mr. Heng Dean Law, Pollination, Dr. Renato Iresida Jr., Department of Finance, and Bonner Loreto, SGB. Thank you so much all. Let's make this a working break if you must, because we'll be diving straight into our second panel discussion, moderated by Ecobusiness Chief Correspondent Hannah Agoseba Fernandez. Thank you very much.
Okay, we'd like to request our panelists to please